This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Innovation, Action, Change. I'm Stephen Cole. The world, as we know it, is changing before our very eyes. COVID-19 has caused major setbacks, with the United Nations warning the pandemic could reverse years of gains in the reduction and alleviation of poverty. And yet, COVID has also been a driving force for innovation, scientific development, and technological revolution. But just how can these advances be harnessed to help win the battle against poverty? Over the next hour on this special program, we'll be speaking to world leaders and global experts in science, politics, economics, development, and women's empowerment to find out just how we might one day be able to say we've won the war on poverty. Coming up in the next hour, innovation. We'll talk to the head of the United Nations Development Programme, Achim Steiner, about the advances designed to help millions out of poverty in the midst of a global pandemic. Action. The Food and Agriculture Organization's first ever chief scientist, Ismahan Alouafi, will tell us how e-agriculture is changing the world. Change. Africa's first female leader and Nobel laureate, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, will tell us why the poverty crisis can never end without true global gender equality. And don't forget, the conversation and content continues online on our Facebook and Twitter pages and at cgtn.com/innovation action change. What does it mean to live in poverty? According to the World Bank, living below the poverty line means surviving on less than $1.90 a day. But poverty means much more than a lack of income and resources. It includes hunger and malnutrition, limited access to water, sanitation, education, health, technology, and other basic services. Breaking the cycle involves decent and productive jobs, sustainable enterprises, and economic transformation. Defeating poverty is the UN's #1 priority. And since 1990, it has made huge strides. Around the world, the number of people living in extreme poverty fell from 36% in 1990, or more than a third of the world's population, to 10% in 2015, with women disproportionately affected. But global progress has suffered a setback. The World Bank says many people who'd barely escaped extreme poverty will soon be plunged back into it. It's now estimated the pandemic forced up to 124 million people into poverty last year. And by the end of this year, that figure is expected to rise to as much as 163 million, with the impact likely to be felt for years to come. But the health crisis isn't the only contributor. The fallout from the pandemic has compounded the impact of conflict and climate change, which were already slowing progress. Climate change is expected to drive up to 130 million people into poverty by 2030. And the biggest threat is in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, where most of the poor live. The World Bank warns that without swift and significant action, ending poverty by 2030 simply won't be attainable. Progress has been made in many Asian countries, with China announcing earlier this year that it had eradicated absolute poverty, proving that the cycle of poverty can be broken. But just how are we going to break the cycle, especially in the middle of a global pandemic? Well, the key is innovation. Take Kenya, for example. 90% of farmers there report being worse off due to COVID. But as our reporter Nick Mudimba reports from Kisii County, there's a new app available that could really help improve their lot.
For many African farmers, owning a tractor is nothing more than a dream. At the world's least mechanized continent, farming equipment is unaffordable for most because of low income and a lack of financing. Without machines, production is roughly half the average for the developing world, with farmers unable to grow their businesses. But in some parts of Africa, this is slowly changing thanks to a mobile phone app. It's ride-hailing, but for farmers, Hello Tractor allows them to hire equipment and operators at the touch of a button.
I feed my kids through this farm. I school them through this farm. I feed my cows with Napier grass, all courtesy of this garden. The tractor innovation and technology is very cheap. It's also tiresome to do all this manually, like bush clearing, and the tractor makes the work very easy.
For farmers here in Kenya's Kisii County, this innovation has helped cut production costs while boosting yields. Almost 2/3 of African farmers depend on labor-intensive agriculture, which is time-consuming and doesn't guarantee a successful harvest. But the app has been a game-changer for many of them. As well as helping farmers, the app makes owning a tractor more profitable as the equipment doesn't lie idle.
Hello Tractor has really boosted our economic state in this area. Farmers here harvest quality food, which helps them in so many ways.
The app also tracks the movement of tractors, monitors fuel consumption and maintenance, and allows owners to see who is operating the equipment.
A typical farmer who receives tractor services through us plants 40 times faster than manual labor and at 1/3 the cost. Now, keep in mind, these are mostly rain-fed agricultural systems. So what that means is establishing your crop on time is mission critical for the grower. So being able to get your land prepared, get your crop established before the rain comes will determine the outcome of your season. And so having access to a tractor allows you to do that so you can earn more money come harvest time.
The startup began in Nigeria in 2014 and now operates in 13 African countries, as well as 3 in Asia. 3,000 tractor owners have used the platform to service over 500,000 farmers. The role of innovation in this area has changed the lives of so many farmers. Through the fertile soils and availability of tractors, the farmers are now able to realize so many profits from the markets. Right now, the main intention is to increase the acreage and, of course, the number of tractors in this area. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Kisii County, Kenya.
Applications like the Hello Tractor app are exactly the kind of digital innovation that organizations like the United Nations Development Programme are currently spearheading to try and help the world build back better and create a more inclusive future for everyone. And joining me from Rome to explain how they plan to do that is the administrator of the UNDP, Achim Steiner. Achim, you've just started your second term as leader of the UNDP. It couldn't have come at a tougher time, could it?
Well, in one sense, that's true, Stephen, but also it could not have come at a more meaningful time, because I think what we are living through right now is a world under great distress and disruption. And I think more than perhaps in a long time, we are reminded of why we need a United Nations, why we need nations to act in unison, and to be at the head of the United Nations Development Programme at a moment when this pandemic has wreaked such havoc in developmental terms makes it actually a very meaningful moment in my time here.
So if COVID has revealed our weaknesses, our Achilles heels, has it also perhaps given us a bit more hope that the world can come together with very short notice to fight a common enemy? And should we also perhaps be looking at poverty alleviation as that common enemy now?
Research that we are doing right now as UNDP with different scenarios and policy choices actually indicates that out of this crisis, we could come with very deliberate policies with a so-called SDG push set of policies that could actually address long overdue and long-standing issues related to poverty, to inequality, and how we can address those. And I think in that sense, I remain hopeful that with perhaps another 6 to 12 months, increasingly we will focus first of all on our collective capacity to act and the imperative to act in a United Nations context, but secondly also putting in place many of the social protection measures, economic stimulus packages, green recovery investments that may over time take us out of this crisis towards a better, more resilient future.
Continuing the theme of build forward better, your theme, and you mentioned innovative practices. Can you give us some more detail about what sort of innovations, what sort of practices you hope will help alleviate poverty that the UNDP is carrying out at the moment?
Let me give you three examples. One we touched on briefly, which is the standing up of socioeconomic response measures, as we call them, particularly the issue of cash transfers. You know, one of the bitter lessons that I think we have learned across the world, it's extremely expensive to be poor in a pandemic. If you are locked down in an economy and you do not have, unemployment benefit, you don't have social safety and security systems in place, how do you feed your family? There is no income. There is no ability to earn the next day's wages that you need to keep going. So temporary basic incomes, which was an idea that we proposed in the middle of 2020 when we looked across the world and saw countries standing up these initiatives, these cash transfer programs, proved to be an extremely effective way in which to prevent more people from falling into poverty and extreme poverty. And we are also presenting some of this early research now because we believe there are key lessons to be learned from that. The second, I think, big driver of innovation coming out of this will be digitalization. In many respects, the deployment of digital technology, I think, has advanced by anywhere between 5 to 10 years, speaking globally, through this crisis. Managing information, being able to deal with just the containment of the virus, but then being able to target populations, being able to connect people, being able to keep educational systems, governance systems, even the judiciary going. UNDP's work in the 170 countries is full of examples where, from a basic Zoom license being deployed to being able to use digital data to assess who are the neediest in society, to then be able to target a program in a matter of weeks for millions of people. And thirdly, I think we will have to confront issues such as 800 million people still not having access to electricity.
You've also said, Achim, the UNDP needs to be, in your words, more nimble, innovative and enterprising. UNDP projects cover all kinds of poverty alleviation. How is that working?
Our role as the development program of the United Nations is to bring that integral perspective, enabling governments to make choices that are investment choices in the future that deliver poverty eradication, cleaner energy, jobs, greater equality in the labor market between men and women. Just let me give you one brief example. We agreed some years ago in the climate context that $100 billion would be provided as investments and concessional finance per annum by the richer world to the poorer world to enable them to invest in that clean energy transition and revolution. And it is a sense of, why is the rich world supposed to pay for the poor world to do that? There is a simple logic here. $100 billion from those who can afford to be co-investors leverages $1 trillion in energy sector investments that the developing world is going to invest. Now, we can either leverage that into a clean energy economy by co-investing, or we can basically lock in a fossil fuel 20th century technology for that next $1 trillion of energy investments in the developing world. These are the partnerships, that's the kind of thinking that will redefine, I think, our understanding of development and development cooperation in our time.
I remember very well 2015 when the UN Sustainable Development Goals were launched, and there was a great degree of optimism and a certain amount of disbelief as well that these could be achieved in so short a time, really. But how would you say 6 years later the level of optimism is at the moment, especially with your number one goal of alleviating poverty?
Sometimes out of the worst moments in human history, we come with some of the boldest responses. And frankly, countries have proven already that, deliberate interventions designed to advance the SDGs, whether it's poverty eradication, whether it's action on climate change or on job creation, you can actually do a great deal more if you choose to do things differently. I mentioned earlier on the notion of an SDG push. We have looked at different scenarios, and governments and economies could now prioritize issues that deal with inequality, with poverty, but also with energy transitions in a much more focused way. We have choices to make. And I think much will depend on how our governments are able to reflect where citizens today are basically looking for a build forward better view of the world.
Let's hope so. Achim Steiner, Administrator for the UN Development Programme, many thanks for joining us on this special programme.
Thank you, Stephen.
Let's talk more about the role of innovation in the battle against poverty. To do so, I'm joined from Washington by Dr. Mari Pangestu, Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank, Professor Tang Min, Executive Vice Chairman of the UChange China Social Entrepreneur Foundation in Beijing, and joining us from London is Professor Tim Unwin, UNESCO's Chair in ICT for Development and Emeritus Professor of Geography at Royal Holloway University in London. Thank you all for joining us. But I want to start with you, Tim, because you said the pandemic has accelerated what we call the restructuring of the global world order. What role has innovation played in that global reset?
Well, I think the first point to make is that COVID has tended to increase the global inequalities that existed already. And I think we're at a crux in global geopolitics, whereby the traditional neoliberal hegemony, focusing on principles of free market privatization, the rolling back of government, is indeed being challenged. And we've seen that in the US recently. And new coalitions of interest are coming to play. And I don't think it's really innovation that is behind that global reset. To be sure, innovation has been absolutely crucial for the development of new vaccines, the ways in which they're rolled out. But if you look at what are generally seen as the leading innovative countries, Switzerland, Sweden, the US, UK, Netherlands, they're not necessarily where the present, let alone the future, global geopolitical strengths are. And structural inequalities existed long before COVID-19. And what we have to do is have creative ways of innovating in the interests of the poorest and the most marginalized. And digital tech can do that, but we have to ensure that the harms and the challenges it faces, not least to our environment, are mitigated.
So let's go now to Professor Tang Min. How important was innovation to China in its battle and success in overcoming absolute poverty?
Since 2016, China identified more than 60 million poor people one by one, and each family of this poor family have to file cards. In these cards, with detailed information about why this family is so poor, what's the program to help them out of poverty in the next few years. Number two is technology, and we're using all the new technology to help the rural poor. For example, e-commerce, like a solar power poverty reduction program. For each poor family, they can offer for around 50,000 yuan or around 7,000 US dollar loan to them. And they can use this loan to doing their project.
So what have we learned from this pandemic? Let's hear what Guy Ryder, the head of the International Labour Organization, had to say.
I like to think, because I'm a sort of an optimist in life, that we've learned a lot from this pandemic. We've learned a lot about the lack of resilience in our societies, the vulnerabilities in our societies, the inequalities in our societies. And we've also learned that actually it is possible to do things differently. It is possible to do things from the policy settings of the past. And if we do that, then I think we can avoid the worst.
Dr. Pangestu, how can we do things differently when it comes to innovation?
It can't be business as usual anymore, because we are facing a twin crisis, which is the development challenges that we accentuated by COVID, whether it's poverty increasing by 100 million or the increased inequality that we expect to happen, explained by Tim earlier. And we have the climate crisis. We have to make sure that there is digital connectivity. For research and development, we need to really encourage at all levels, not just at the science labs, but at all different levels. And there has to be sharing and cooperation.
Tim, I saw you nodding there to what Dr. Pangestu had to say, but what do governments and businesses need to do to foster the kind of technological innovation that will allow people to lift themselves out of absolute poverty?
I would see innovation in a slightly different way, because I would place the emphasis more on technical innovation. Digital technologies often increase inequalities. They may contribute to economic growth, but at the same time, as Dr. Pangestu was saying, if you don't have access, you're going to get left further and further behind. As Professor Tan Ming said in China, there was a focus on the poorest and the most marginalized. That's where we must begin. We must work to develop communal innovation, sustainable bottom-up approaches. The answer is really in the systems of incentives, tax regimes and regulations that governments are able to put in place to enable that innovation to take place. Enabling private sector innovation, but also providing an environment where we can rethink how innovation can be used for the poorest and the most marginalized. And I actually think it'd be much more effective for the global community to do that. We do know how to enable the poor to benefit from the digital technology, but by and large, across the world, they're not. The poorest and most marginalized are being left out. Let's do what we know, but do it better and in the interests communally and sustainably.
Professor Tim Unwin, many thanks to you for joining us on this special program. Professor Tang and Dr. Pangestu will continue the discussion with you a little later. And of course, don't forget, you can continue the debate and find lots more content online on our Facebook and Twitter pages and at cgtn.com/innovation action change. Of course, one of the countries leading the fight against poverty is China, which even in the middle of a pandemic has managed to eliminate absolute poverty. And the key to that victory, especially in rural areas, is technology. Smart farming techniques have revolutionized the country's agricultural sector, helping small farmers increase their yields and their profits. And for many, the solution has literally dropped out of the sky. Li Jianhua reports from the village of Zhangjiakou near Beijing.
A few years ago, Erhabu was considered one of the country's poorest villages. Young people are still lured to the big cities, leaving behind the older generation to make a living in farming. Liu Fang is in her 40s, but she's one of the youngest farmers who remained here. She is showing us the traditional way of watering plants in her tiny garden, but about 2 years ago, she turned to drones.
I had gone to other people's fields to watch them use drones to spray pesticides. It was rare back then and I was surprised. A few days ago, my crops were infested. My tractor couldn't go into the field, and spraying the pesticides manually is too slow. The crops could be overrun by pests overnight. So I called in a drone team, which took only a short while to finish spraying my plot.
Liu takes me to her field where a team is using a drone to water her crops. After measuring the area, the pilot activates the drone with one tap of her smartphone. The drone can water this plot, about 2 hectares, in less than 2 hours. With one farmer, it'll take 3 days. The use of the drone has increased Liu's crop yields by about 20%.
This not only promotes new farming technologies, but it accelerates rural modernization. Also, this makes the working environment for farmers much safer. They don't have to go into the fields with a water tank on their back. Once a farmer learns how to fly a drone, they may even get a job. I think this can boost jobs in the countryside and reduce poverty via technology.
Agricultural drones were adopted in China about 10 years ago, and their popularity has grown since 2017. Drone manufacturers hope this technology will help create a new generation of farmers.
With the autonomous technology, an individual farmer now can manage more and more bigger and bigger farms. So the income for them will substantially increase as well. And this will attract the young generation people return to the farmland to choose farmer as a profession for their career. And this will also bring back the young blood back to the rural community to boost the economy too.
Across farms in China, this is becoming a more familiar scene, with every drone that takes to the skies an ally in the battle against rural poverty. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Zhangjiakou.
That's just one example from China. But just how vital is science and technology in the global fight against poverty? With me now in Rome is the first ever chief scientist of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, Ismahane Eruafi. Ismahane, your role is to beat hunger and poverty, and they're pretty ambitious goals, aren't they? How exactly does science and technology help in the fight against those?
Unfortunately, we overexploit the nature and the planet Earth resources. So I can't see another solution right now beside around innovation, because we have the same playing cards, but we need to play better. How do we play better? We play better only if we use science, we use technology, and we use innovation. And when I talk about innovation, it's really a broad innovation. It's not only technological innovation, it's partnership innovation, it's financing innovation, it's business model innovation. How do we do things? So I think really, because we are at a turning point in history, particularly with COVID-19, that shows us how fragile is our system, how interconnected we are, how much we need to change our agri-food system. We can't do it without science, technology, and innovation. And that's really what I hope I'm bringing to FAO and to its member states.
Have the changes in thinking also applied to e-agriculture? It's a technological advance and it's helping to change the face of farming around the world. So tell us what exactly it is and how it works.
E-agriculture is the future. So what we used to say is that taking the information up to the farmer has been always difficult. So we saw a lot of innovation that were created at universities or at the public institutions, but never made it to the ground. On the contrary, with the private sector, you see really that flow of innovation working very well. And it's because of the business model of the private sector. But if I want to take all in all, e-agriculture would help us to bring data and information in a much more efficient way. And that information should be able to get to the decision makers, so they take the right decision. It should be also to get it to the farmers, but also to the consumers and to the other actors in the agri-food system. So I'm seeing really a surge of technologies, and FAO is behind many of them, because we really believe that in this decade, we could make a lot if we use rightly the technology, the digital technology.
I suppose the difficulty is to get the message to the poor rural farmers about these innovations, and also, I suppose, teach them more about climate change and how that is affecting farming in the poorer areas.
Absolutely, Stephen. The issue is how to get the information to the farmers. And that's really the extension services. It's a key area that we need to reimagine, that we need to reinvent, that we need to make it in a language that farmers understand. And that's, you got education issues, you got literacy issues, you got accessibility to the technology in terms of cost and know-how. There's a lot of issues. But if I wanna address the second point on climate change, for me, the farmers are the most resilient and the people that understand the best climate change. Because the farmers have been living with it for many, many years, and they are very adaptable to it. But now, how could we use technology and know-how to really adapt to climate change? And that's really a very important point. In terms of, that's where forecast, early warning, understanding the trends, and knowing when your rain gonna come, or knowing what temperature you're gonna have in the next decade and breed the right crops for it, it's very important. And all these new technologies, particularly e-agriculture, could help us really use the data, use the know-how to really provide the farmers and provide the policymakers, provide the market, provide the consumers with the right information at the right time.
How do you make sure there's a more accurate focus by governments on fighting poverty and fighting hunger? And what sort of strategies should you be telling them to adopt, do you think?
The way that you can improve your production efficiency, it's by looking at it as as a holistic food system. And what you have to do is really invest in understanding the system, invest in developing the different pieces of the system that will make it better. We need the inputs to be really correct. And those inputs include the seeds, includes the varieties, include the irrigation technologies, include the fertilizer and what have you. We need to make sure that our processes are correct. And to do the processes correct, you need the right policies, you need the right engagement. So that coordination of the whole value chain or the whole food system, it's very important from the technological side, from the policy side, from the partnership side, from the continuum side, from the farm to the fork. So for me, the technology and the innovation and the data could only make this better. But it can make it better if we really understand it in its wholesome, not only pieces of it.
The FAO's project covers all kinds of forms of poverty alleviation. Can you give us some hard and real examples where scientific expertise, like yours, is changing lives?
Absolutely. The water management, the water scarcity in the MENA region, which I'm quite familiar with, it's a huge problem that we have been talking about for several years. But really, the leadership of FAO in developing the water scarcity program really allowed the countries to come together, to understand how their issues are similar, and they could work together, not only because they have underground or surface water that is between their borders that they have in common, but also because they have similar ecosystem and they could help each other by trading between them, by doing research together, by working on similar policies and making synergies between the different policies. And the focus of the work now that we are talking about how we want to change our agri-food system because they are not optimal is that we are looking at how could we make the transformation, make our food system more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable. And by the end, the ultimate goal for us is having a better life through better livelihood for all people, leaving no one behind.
Ismahani Elouafi, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It was a pleasure.
Well, let's talk more now about globalization and technology. We're joined again from Washington by the Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank, Dr. Mari Pangasku, the Executive Vice Chairman of the UChange China Social Entrepreneur Foundation, Professor Tang Min in Beijing, and we're also joined from New York by Senior UN Advisor, world-renowned Professor of Economics and best-selling author, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And let's start with Professor Sachs. Jeffrey, globalization helped COVID spread very fast around the world, but also allowed scientists to develop vaccines in less than a year. So what role has globalization played in the kind of technology developed to lift people out of poverty?
We're in an era of massive technological advance. Fortunately, technology does spread across national boundaries because it would be no good, no fair, and unworkable if technology remained the preserve of just a small number of countries. The digital revolution gives us extraordinarily powerful tools, but we have two huge challenges. One is the inequality of capacity and access to these technologies. The other is the tendency, unfortunately, to turn them into arenas of geopolitical competition rather than cooperation. So technology is crucial, but deploying it for the common good remains a paramount challenge.
And Professor Tang, how has China used technology as a way out of poverty?
Let me give you an example which I personally involved with, rural e-commerce. By using a rural e-commerce, the poor farmer can sell their product directly to urban consumers and without passing many of the middlemen. With that, a little technology, but they can sell twice or triple their price, and their income increase dramatically. On average, they're getting annual income increase by 3,000 yen to 50,000 yen. Not only themselves out of poverty, also they help whole villages out of poverty.
Dr. Pangestu, how do we ensure that digital connectivity doesn't only benefit the wealthier countries?
I think that's a really crucial question. I think we have to remember that 3.7 billion people do not have digital connectivity, and almost 1 billion of people still do not have electricity. So before you can talk about digital connectivity, first of all, you have to have them connected with the electricity. So if you talk about the prerequisite, one is, of course, the electricity connectivity. Second, then, is the digital connectivity itself, the telecommunications infrastructure. How do you have affordable, accessible, and fast connectivity within a country? And once you're connected, then you say, okay, do I have a handphone? Do I have the instrument to connect me, right? You earlier mentioned give everybody a handphone. I think, or a very low-cost tablet for kids in school, for instance. So this is really also crucial. And in a way, it is also providing new opportunities for growth of various industries related. Once you're connected and you have the instrument to connect, how do you use that connectivity to learn, to have education, to get skills, to get delivery of the basic social services, whether it's education or health or social protection? And how do you learn the skills? How do you get connected to the financial system to access yourself to financial services and be able to use e-commerce platforms? So the digital literacy that goes with financial literacy has to be there also.
Professor Sachs, Jeffrey, how can we prevent technology, or how can we make sure technology prevents inequality?
Well, I wanted to say right on the money. I want to focus on the money for one moment. In order to have the connectivity, access to technology, and so on, one needs finance. And so the first point I would emphasize is we need roughly to have 10 times the level of development financing than we have right now. Technology by itself could be a great leapfrog, a great equalizer. The thing that makes it unequal is lack of access, not the technology itself, because if you have internet, if you have digital services in poor areas, they grow tremendously fast. That's China's lesson for the world. China showed how to end poverty by deploying infrastructure across the country. This is why investing is so central. What we've seen in COVID is the rich countries have access to capital markets at low interest rates. The poor countries pay a ferocious risk premia or don't have access at all. That's why I like the multilateral development banks, like the World Bank and the regional development banks. They have a unique opportunity right now to put in place green and digital technologies and thereby tremendously accelerate the progress in developing countries, to make these technologies leapfrog technologies, to narrow gaps rather than to have them widen. We have the technologies, we have the funds, by the way, because interest rates worldwide are so low, but we need to direct them towards these global priorities.
A very big thank you to you, Jeffrey, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, for your insights today. Professor Tang and Dr. Pangestu will continue the discussion with you shortly. And of course, don't forget, you can continue the debate and find lots more content online on our Facebook and Twitter pages and at cgtn.com/innovation-action-change. The majority of the world's poor are women, And the pandemic has only increased the global gender gap, among refugees especially. Increasing violence, abuse, sexual exploitation and trafficking have made many women even more vulnerable. And those without formal education or work experience are struggling to escape poverty. But in Antwerp, in Belgium, a small catering business is giving refugee women big opportunities to turn their lives around, as Tony Waterman reports.
As anyone who has ever lived abroad can attest, there are few things more comforting than the familiar smells and flavors of home. It's exactly that sense of comfort that these chefs at From Syria with Love in Antwerp, Belgium, are trying to recreate. But this isn't your average catering business. All the women here are refugees. Alam fled Homs, Syria, and arrived in Europe in 2015, at the height of the refugee crisis. She was 8 months pregnant with her 5th child when she embarked on the treacherous and final leg of a 20-day journey crossing the Aegean Sea from Turkey to Greece.
I had a few small bags with me, clothes, paperwork, but when the boat started taking on water, we were told to throw everything overboard, so we arrived with only the clothes on our backs.
For months, Alam and her family survived solely on government aid. Then, an unexpected encounter with Yara al-Adib changed her life. Yara, herself a Syrian migrant and also missing home, had been yearning to open a Syrian kitchen.
I never knew the great impact it would create on the woman. When a woman gains financial independence, it's not the financial independence that she gains, but it's the independence. It's the feeling that I can give back to the society or back to my small community as much as any other man can do.
Empowering refugee women became even more urgent for Yara after the 2016 Brussels terrorist attacks, which left 32 people dead. She was struck by an interview with one of the perpetrators' mothers, who spoke about her inability to control her son.
Syrian migrants now in Belgium, we could also have kids that turn out to be terrorist attacks because the mother cannot kind of show impact in the home. So I thought to myself, like, this is the moment to really empower these mothers, because if a mother is empowered, she can empower her son.
The 4 women Yara employs are among the more than 1 million refugees that streamed into Europe in 2015. Many are now resettled and integrated into society. While the fate of Syrian refugees has largely faded into the background in recent years, the thorny issue of migration is once again front and center in Europe, as tens of thousands flee Taliban rule in Afghanistan. Hundreds have already arrived here in Belgium, among them women and children, often the most vulnerable, forced to start life over in a foreign country. In any crisis, there is always the fear that women will be left behind. Alam considers herself one of the lucky ones, surrounded by a support system of like-minded women, empowered and employed.
The best thing is that my kids look up to me now and they ask for things because they know I make money, and I feel very proud that I can give that to them.
Certainly a recipe worth repeating. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Antwerp, Belgium.
An amazing story there, but what needs to be done on a global scale to address the gender poverty imbalance? Well, joining me now from Monrovia is the former president of Liberia and Nobel Peace Laureate, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Madam President, you were the first ever female leader in the world's poorest continent. Why do you think it took until the 21st century for that to happen?
Women all over the world have been subjected to stereotyping, valued mostly for their reproductive role, and confined to the role of caring for children and for home. Patriarchy has had its full weight on the backs of women before even histories began to be written. Women have therefore been denied full equity, equal opportunity, and justice. Over the years, we really can say that much has happened to change this status quo. Women have steadily broken the barriers to achieve rights and participation at all levels in society. Change is indeed coming.
You say change is happening, perhaps change is not happening fast enough, but if the pace is upped for gender parity, how can that help beat poverty?
Oh, clearly, if you have women with equal opportunity and women have parity with men, you are going to see those changes that I mentioned. The changes in national laws, the changes in policies. You are going to see women who bring to leadership quite a different role. Women who give other women's opportunities, who lift them up. This is how you're going to get this done. I mean, clearly, if you look at some of the examples already that are before us, you can see, but I also mentioned to you that we have examples of men that have been as very active and progressive in promoting gender parity. And in those cases, look at the economy, look at how those economies grow, look at how, well, in many cases, that also enhances the processes of democracy. Democracy enhances participation of women. Participation of women leads to changes that empower women. Empowered women with higher income levels then are able to move themselves out of the poverty trap.
Okay, so you're talking about leadership there, and the role of women in the alleviation of poverty is a global issue and therefore perhaps requires a global response. Who should be leading that global response, do you think?
That response has to be led by women and men in national architecture of authority, in the global architecture of leadership, in institutions that promote women leaders, that those that make decisions regarding women. It has to be a collective effort. All persons, women and men, in these positions of power and authority must lead the response. As I mentioned, through laws, through policy, they must address the issue of women poverty. Women groups, women partnership institutions must also continue with the strong advocacy that you see today, demanding an improvement in the environment for women and girls and an enhancement in the quality of their lives.
Education, of course, is the big key to empowerment and also to the alleviation of poverty. It's something you've spent a lot of your time on while you were president. What more can be done now?
Education is the key to development. And there have been tremendous progress all over the world. The quality of education, particularly for the poorest nation, has declined in large measures recently, perhaps due to reliance on social media for important information that would otherwise require evidence-based academic knowledge. We also say that national educational systems need improved programs for reading, because we have found that, again, with so many diversions to other means of obtaining information, reading in schools at the level required for knowledge have also declined. We need those systems that will emphasize digitization for today's technological age. Our youth in Africa, representing the largest percent of the population, need to also be supported, greater effort, so that they become technological ready in a competitive world.
Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Many thanks to you for joining us for this special program.
Thank you so much.
To continue the discussion on women's empowerment and how it helps free people around the world from the poverty trap, we're joined by humanitarian activist and CEO of Hunger Relief International, Rachel Zelon. And with us once more from Washington is the Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank, Dr. Mayuri Pangestu, and the Executive Vice Chairman of the U-Change China Social Entrepreneur Foundation, Professor Tang Min, in Beijing. But Rachel, first to you. We heard Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf saying that empowered women are able to move themselves out of the poverty trap. Is that something you've seen, witnessed in your own work?
It absolutely is something that I have witnessed. But I'd like to start off by saying that women are incredibly powerful. Women raise children. Women are responsible for most of agriculture. They're responsible for their children's care, nutrition, education. Women are responsible for gathering water, for gathering wood. So women are incredibly powerful. What we need to do as a world is to invest. It's not a tremendous amount. We need to invest our energy. We need to invest our time. Give them the tools that they need to not just survive, but to thrive. And then we give their children that leap ahead, and their children's children.
So it's all about unlocking female potential. Dr. Pangestu, what does female empowerment mean to you? Is it about gender equality, or is it more than that, as we try and unlock the potential for women around the world?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Rachel here. Women have a lot of power, and I would say resilience. The image that keeps me going in many of the things that I do is when I was a Minister of Trade, after the Jogja earthquake in 2007, I went to the market which had been totally destroyed, and there was a woman selling, a woman trader selling food in the dark at 4 a.m. in the morning. So I asked her, why are you doing this? I have to eat, and people have to eat. Such a simple answer. And this is, I think, the image for me is how do we make sure that we empower women to have the equal rights from education, health, reproductive rights, all the way to economic participation.
Professor Tang, tell us about the link between improved access to education that Dr. Pangestu mentioned and China's success in alleviating poverty.
Now, the problem in China is in the poverty area and in rural area, the quality of education is not very high. So in terms of education, we help, and the government really create a big effort to improve the quality of rural education. For example, in the past, there were a lot of middle-aged women. They may not getting a higher education before, but they already passed their school year, and they're working in rural or urban area. So now we create a lot of a lifelong training program to them and to improve their skills, and then they can make more income.
Let's hear now from the Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Programme, Amir Mahmoud Abdullah.
You know, there's a term we use in our type of business where we often refer to, man-made disasters and, man-made problems. And I've always said there's a reason we call it a man-made disaster, and that is because they are invariably caused by men. But, the optimist in me has to always then quip, for every man-made disaster, there's probably a woman-led solution.
So, Rachel Zelon, do you agree that women hold the solution to many of the problems that men have allegedly created?
Well, I'm really glad you used the word allegedly, because I hesitate to place responsibility on men or on any gender. I think that a lot of the challenges that we have faced is in terms of human-made problems is more about our traditions, traditional roles, customs. And so women and men have assumed traditional roles throughout their histories for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And what we really need is to begin to modify some of these roles. Are women the solution in and of themselves? Perhaps not. But should women and girls play a much larger role in improving the world we live in eradicating poverty? Absolutely. Are we really taking advantage of all of the potential that I talked about earlier? We are not.
Let's move on, because I want to hear now from the former president of Mauritius, Dr. Gurib Fakim.
We need to factor in the female ingenuity, because it is no longer an ethical thing to do or a moral thing to do. It makes economic sense. So we need to bring in the women competence on board so that we can emerge faster and stronger post-COVID.
Dr. Pangestu, do you agree that women's empowerment is the definite and the certain link to economic success, certainly in poorer countries?
You can see that if we can address the inequality that actually has, the fact that COVID has impacted women more than men, whether it's because they lost jobs or because girls are not going back to school, or the health, women's health issues which are not being addressed. If we address that, we're going to address the human capital. Women are half of the human capital of any country. And you want to increase the labor force participation rate and economic participation of women. So what do you get? You get, of course, the women empowerment is actually going to be part of your economic recovery. How do we make sure that women-owned businesses, which also were more impacted in the crisis, can be revitalized and empowered, whether it's through the financial access or getting them to be digitally more capable and interrelated to the e-commerce and so on and so forth. So I do believe strongly that it is about the benefits to the economy and to reducing poverty.
A very big thank you to our special guests, humanitarian activist and CEO of Hunger Relief International, Rachel Zelon, the Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank, Dr. Maori Pangestu, and the Executive Vice Chairman of the UChange China Social Entrepreneur Foundation, Professor Tang Min. The discussions we've heard and stories we've seen have shown us that there is a pathway out of poverty, but it needs innovative solutions, smarter use of technology, and the collective efforts of an empowered generation to help turn the tide. Our special program, Innovation, Action, Change, has now come to an end, but the debate has just begun. To continue the conversation and find plenty more content, head to our Facebook and Twitter pages or to cgtn.com/innovation action change. Thanks for watching. From me, Stephen Cole, and all the team here in London, goodbye.
What we are living through right now is a world under great distress and disruption.
The biggest challenge is addressing inequality.
Change is indeed coming.
It can't be business as usual anymore.
Let's do what we know, but do it better.
We play better only if we use science, we use technology, and we use innovation.
Women are incredibly powerful.
Empowered women to move themselves out of the poverty trap.
This is not rocket science.
E-agriculture is the future.
If you have digital services in poor areas, they grow tremendously fast. That's China's lesson for the world.
And I think we're at a crux in global geopolitics. China is the present.
Sometimes out of the worst moments in human history, we come with some of the boldest responses.
And by the end, the ultimate goal for us is having a better life.